I'm Rob.
And I'm Dave.
We've got the same dad.
But we did not meet until I was nearly 30.
So this is the podcast where
we make up for lost time
by sharing an album that
your
brother
shared.
No! That's right, and this month we are going to be talking about an album very dear to my heart, You're Dead, ! By Flying Lotus. As is tradition, I need to ask you from the off, Dave. When I said Flying Lotus, what was the first thing that came to your mind?
Pretty much nothing. I had literally never heard of Flying Lotus in my life.
We can probably end the podcast right there with you just thanking me and profusely and go our separate ways, because there's no way that we're not going to agree that this is an absolute masterpiece. Flying Lotus is, of course, the supreme maverick musical mastermind. Born Stephen Ellison, came up through the LA beat scene, and I thought he started experimenting more and more with jazz and other forms. I think You're Dead is probably his masterpiece, but I think everything he's done is a masterpiece. It's his fifth album, and I picked it just because it turned 10 years old, and that boggled me. I realised that I've been on a journey with him for a decade. So, without further ado, Dave, I'm ready for your profuse thanks.
Well, thank you, Rob. Yeah, end of podcast. That's it. Job done. Isn't it great? One of the many reasons to do this podcast was because I knew you had a great store of music about which I knew nothing, and I was pretty sure that some of it would be brilliant. And sure enough, this is in the brilliant, amazing category. Not without some flaws, which I'm sure we'll come on to, but 90%, yeah, I'm totally hooked. I'm into the journey. For anyone who's not even heard it, how do you describe it? Because it is this mash of, jazz, rock, soul, R&B, rap, choral work, almost any musical genre you care to imagine. He's shoved into 39 minutes. People do that. The difference here is for most of those genres, he's really bloody good at it. So he's clearly a master of most of these things, and he's shoved them together in a way that is quite spellbinding and alluring and hypnotic, and that merits repeat listening, that you kind of discover rich things every listen. So headline for me, yeah, great. I think it's amazing. I think he's amazing. I'm really interested to know more about him, because you could read this as a kind of a sampler of everything he can do. But as a piece of work, I'm only beginning clearly to get into the foothills of understanding it. But, 9.5 out of 10, VG, excellent, tick.
I completely agree with everything you said, and that's actually the point. I mean, I've been listening to this record on and off for the past decade, and it's only the last couple of days where I forced myself to sit down and really, really, really listen to. And yeah, as you're right, I keep hearing new nuances to it all. But before we go on, I guess there's two things we need to underline about this record. The title. So it can be read in numerous ways that we'll come on to, but what it definitely does allude to is the somewhat overblown conceit of the record, which I don't know if you're familiar with.
Literally no idea. And I've got my own sort of very amateur views about structure, but really nothing about meaning at this stage. So yeah, tell me, is there a backstory? What's the overarching plot?
No. In that case, you've got to tell me what you think this album sounds like.
Well, that's harsh. Okay, so the way I've come to appreciate it, it's 19 tracks, allegedly, but I think, those delineations are can be a little bit irrelevant in a piece of work like this. Some of which are 30 seconds long, some of which I think the biggest is like 4 minutes long. And they just, there's a flow between the 19 tracks, clearly. And how do you kind of emotionally and intellectually engage in that? I've kind of come to see it as a 3-movement symphony, so kind of 3 distinct areas where there's a break filler. So the tracks for me, Dead Man's Tetris and Ready or Not, kind of break up the album into 3 sections of about 5 or 6 songs each. But in terms of the overall plot and meaning of the album, I mean, a lot of it's very musical. Where there are lyrics, yeah, there's quite a lot about being dead and in different ways, shapes, forms. But I haven't got any deeper than that. You tell me, what's going on in his head when he's making this?
Bingo! This album is, and this is the funny part, I read about the album before I heard it, and I was ready to shoot it to pieces, because the central conceit is it's meant to be a walk through the afterlife. It's inspired by the Tibetan Book of the Dead. And when I read that, I was obviously, I was like, what is this? What is this nonsense? However, it remains, I think, the first and only 5-star album review I've ever written. When this landed on my desk 10 years ago, blew me out the water. But yeah, so the central tenet is death. And I think when we go through the tracks, we can talk about the kind of stages of death and the afterlife and acceptance and denial, potentially. Yeah. But the other thing I have to underline is, like so much of Flying Lotus's work, it's really underpinned by the huge musical talent of Thundercat.
Oh, okay.
Every time I listen to this album, I can't help thinking that it should be credited equally, because I don't care who's pulling it all together, who's crafting the beats, who's doing the production. So many of the musical ideas are clearly on the bass, and so many have even been composed or, in many cases, I think, improvised by Thundercat. And sure, I mean, they're best mates. They've been hanging out since they were teenagers. They've always worked together. Right. And Thundercat's always been on Flying Lotus's work since his third album, Cosmogrammus. But yeah, this to me completely feels like a duo album. Famously, they got the idea for the album together. Apparently, they're driving around. They listened to George Duke, 1974 Fusion record, and hearing all that widdly stuff, and just kind of went, shoot, no one makes music like this anymore. Why don't we? It'd be so audacious.
Is that the very phrase they used? It'll be audacious.
Well, I think what they said was, when you hear it, you're like, oh shit, you're dead. Why don't we make some shit that just kills everybody?
Just for a moment, Rob. So, Thundercat, who is he? What? I've never heard of him.
Bit of backstory then. So, yeah, FlyLo, Stephen Ellison, and Thundercat, Stephen Bruner, are big, long-standing musical collaborators and always big buddies. I think they grew up in LA and as teenagers together. But they kind of stray very adjacent but different worlds. So Thundercat is primarily seen as a jazz musician and has done a lot of work with Kamasi Washington. But then his own solo work is, it's still vocal-led, it's very disco, it's very kooky. I think it's of no genre itself. But he also works a lot with hip-hop artists, including famously Kendrick Lamar, who features on this. Whereas FlyLo is very much a beat maker who came up in the hip-hop scene, crafting beats, other people crafting his own beats. Very much in that kind of, I guess, post-Dilla world of invention. And this was him kind of quote-unquote making a jazz record. So we that was it. Like them, he was saying to Thundercat, let's do this. And that's why I kind of feel like, as much as Thundercat is all over all of FlyLo's work, this one to me really does scream like a complete collaboration. There's not really a song that is not layered with those incredible bass fills. And what's wonderful about Thundercat is he doesn't play the bass like a bassist, right? He can do those big notes, but he can do those shredding solos. But he can also do these picky chords. He can make it sound like a violin. He can make it sound like a guitar. He can feel so much sonic space with it, and it doesn't have to just be that big bottom end we associate with a lot of modern post hip hop jazz funk influenced bass. So I think we can't talk enough about the role of these two incredible geniuses in crafting this album. Did the bass really jump out to you?
Actually not, and that's probably testament to how crafted the record is. Or craft is the wrong word. It just sounds totally natural and organic and of the earth almost. It doesn't feel like people have. It's that thing about you don't see the work and that means it's brilliant. They presumably did sweat over lots of moments of this, but it sounds effortless. I didn't feel it was dominated by any stunning guitar work on it. There's some brilliant beats. There's some amazing choral work. There's some really good rap. There's some, I didn't feel like it was dominated by any one genre or any one instrument. I did wonder in my head. I've been going, yeah, you're dead, and so is genre, which is a great thing because I think genre can really silo people. And this, it's not the first bit of. But you see, fusion is almost the wrong word. It's certainly not the first bit of fusion I've heard. But fusion, often it wears. These are the two things we're putting together. Bang, we've done it. Here is our fused stuff. And this just kind of takes stuff that's because I've always said, music, whatever the genre, music is rhythm and melody. Yeah, that's what it is. And this really, really lives that, which is partly why I enjoyed it so much, because it really, really doesn't get stuck in a silo for more than 20 seconds.
No, so I think what you've got there is a combination of elements. So as I said, you've got essentially a beat maker from the hip hop world who, I think, he plays keys, evidently. He understands a bit of harmony, but he's not, a blazing jazz soloist, Steve Ellison. He's primarily a laptop guy, right? And he's gone, I'm going to make a jazz album. So rather than sitting there crafting, moving little dials for the perfect reverb on a fake snare or whatever, it's actually, a lot of it's based on live ideas that came in the room. And I think actually a lot of the record, especially the opening stretch, which we'll talk about, probably was improvised. And then you're combining that with the kind of mixtape mindset of a millennial, really, who's used to that, being a musical magpie, and also used to kind of cutting and splicing all these ideas. I feel like kind of conceptually it's picking off a little bit from the slightly misunderstood fusion era of like Miles and Herbie in the early 70s, especially obviously the post Bitches Brew through to, Dark Magus and Live Evil and all those great live albums he made, especially, and obviously Big Fun and A Gal with It, and I know your favourite, Agafia and Pangea, as well as the early Herbie movement.
I'm so glad I've got written down really clearly, do not be the first person to mention Bitches Brew, because in a way it's too obvious a comparison. Not having said that it doesn't get stuck in silos, it really doesn't. You can see some very things that you feel that they've definitely listened to a lot.
But I don't think they'd shy away from that. In fact, Miles has definitely come up in interviews and stuff. Like, of course. And it's also worth noting that Ellison is the great nephew of Alice Coltrane and therefore John Coltrane. So there's that lineage there. It's just that he's come up in a different world. I think the difference is, rather than those 20-minute side-long, miles-long jams, which were cut up a little bit by TMAC at the time, but pretty much allowed to breathe and just vamp and just build into they were almost ambient. Some of it was Stockhausian, right? That was the vibe. These are like pick and mix, sped up, side down, TikTok generation Vignecs that have been thrown together. So rather than having one or two musical ideas, stringing together a whole idea like a 70s Mile album, we've got more than a dozen. We've got, I would say actually more than 19, because a couple of these songs have very distinct second stages in them. So I'd say we've got 24 musical ideas here in the space of 38-minute album, which...
Two things around that. One is, it's almost like it's the kind of clever, intense fusion work of the 70s, but for the kind of 2010s generation, which of course an old git like me will say, it's because they've got no attention span and they're used to growing up on TikTok and just watching 30 seconds video, and then they might get a bit interested in something and watch it for 2 minutes, and then, but actually that's what this does. But I don't mind it, because as we'll come onto there is a conceptual arc as well and a musical arc as well, but it is almost like it's jazz fusion for people with the attention span of the new millennium rather than the last.
If you want to see it that way, sure. So Tesla, which I think we can say is the first real song. I mean, it opens with Theme, right? Which is kind of this big droney kind of, which I presume is like the moment of death, is what I'm seeing it as, right? And then we get those kind of incessant drumming, and then, Kamasi comes in and all this blasting. So, stuff's happening. But then it kind of goes into this bit that, to me, really, Tesla, the second song, and I think first real, moment we get to breathe. To me, it sounds a lot like In a Silent Way. It's a more restless In a Silent Way, and it is because it's got those stringing big Fender Rhodes chords. And I think that was probably quite a deliberate homage, and I feel like that was where they were like trying to build. That was the kind of architecture they're trying to build when they were making the quote unquote jazz album, which I don't think they succeeded in making a quote unquote jazz album, because a lot of other things happened later. But I actually feel like the opening kind of quartet of pieces, if you will, which I think only run to less than 7 minutes, but they've all got this sense of live drums and Thundercat riffing and blazing and Kamasi Washington sax wafting in and out. This to me sounds like they're trying to concoct a jazz album, and I almost wonder if they then got bored of that. How did you find that opening quartet? I mean, I think it's
exactly when I said earlier about I see this album in 3/3. The first third is possibly the most accessible and the most. It's certainly not straight up jazz, but it's the most jazz. In your face jazz. Really nice, actually, that Herbie Hancock's on it. It's like, that feels like a new generation tip in the hat to the old, and respect there and all of that kind of thing. What's he doing on it?
He's playing the keys. He's playing those big,
the keys.
Those big open, like that kind of very In a Silent Way, that bling thing.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is, he does show up again on Moment of Hesitation.
Okay, much later.
Which I feel like in many ways feels a bit like a reprise of Tesla. It probably came from the same session, but it's very much the same move, and it acts as a nice. You don't like me using the term palate cleanser, but I mean, he comes back again then, and then there's another moment where there's a pianist employed who, I'm sorry, man, I've forgotten his name, but he just sounds like he's deliberately been told to kind of sound like Herbie and do the same kind of big.
That's nice.
Kind of,
that's brilliant, isn't it?
10-finger chords.
Imagine you're some sort of session guy. That's equivalent, go on, just sound like Herbie, or you're a guitarist. Come on, just sound like Hendrix, or you're a trumpet player. Just sound like Miles. Come on, get it, sort it out.
I think it's worth noting, as far as I'm aware, all the other keys on the record, of which there aren't actually that many, are played by Ellison himself, right? But
all right.
They probably did one session with Herbie where he laid down these couple of grooves. And then tried to recreate that mood one more time.
So look, you asked me about that first. I make it 8.5 minutes. So you've got Theme, Tesla, FKN Dead, Never Catch Me, and then it goes into Dead Man's Tetris. So you've got 5 songs, 8.5 minutes. That it is the most accessible, but each piece is very different. You've got some heavy guitar jazz, you've got some ethereal choir, you've got some solid funk soul beat going on, then a bit more choral work. Never Catch Me, I think, is brilliant, the way the piano and the guitar interplay, and then you've got this kind of the first time there's almost a chorus of Say You'll Never Catch Me, that gets repeated, and that it almost kind of the first 4 songs you're like, what is going on? And then Almost Never Catch Me just seems to bring it all together into this kind of suite of songs. That first 8.5 minutes, just that did it for me. And I would say that the second 2/3 don't feel quite as complete and as accessible.
Hold your horses, Dave. We need to talk about Never Catch Me. I actually thought you might revolt because, this one definitely Blear's song. After these kind of 4 frenetic, fidgety fusion vignettes, you kind of do get very much a song, and a nearly 4-minute song, which is, I guess, in many ways the most conventional hip hop sounding song as well. That it's got that very kind of very catchy, but very typical piano hook. The doom 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 doom. It's got a very obvious hook and a very nice big groove. I think we also need to talk about the guest here, Kendrick Lamar. I mean, arguably like among the most respected lyricists, MCs on the planet right now, right? I think it's worth noting because we've already had Kamasi Washington blowing over Cold Dead, right? So Kamasi Washington is probably the most successful jazz musician to emerge in the last decade or so. He had a huge success with his triple LP album The Epic, which came out in 2015, which really, whilst mainly instrumental, very spiritual jazz influenced, saw him playing big festivals like Primavera and breaking over to a pop crowd. Wasn't really that much of a hip hop influence, but it somehow saw him become a quasi pop star. And that was followed up by the 5 LP Heaven and Hell, and now he's gone a bit quiet. But he was very much part of this breakdown genre. And he and FlyLo and Thundercat, most importantly, all played on Kendrick Lamar's 2015 masterpiece, To Pimp a Butterfly, which I am not a hip-hop head, but it's probably, by a country mile, my favourite hip-hop album ever, because it's basically Trinidad jazz hip-hop album. What I'm saying is interesting is that both of these people, Lamar was already famous on the back of 2012's Good Kid, Mad City. He was already one of the biggest rappers in the world, but he wasn't as big as Butterfly made him. Right. Or Damn in 2018, I think, which won him the Pulitzer Prize. So he only got bigger. Okay. But to me, all this music was happening around the same time. All these West Coast talents of different persuasions were playing together and crafting art together. And this was just when that jazz was becoming cool, quote unquote, which there was a bit of a La La Land boom as well, whatever. But a lot of the jazz being cool was the result of Kendrick's crossover album and to a certain extent Kamasi's, right? And they're both on this record, which came out kind of 6 months before their own breakthroughs. Right. And that's what I find really interesting. To your point about the sections, it's interesting. Maybe it's because I'm influenced by listening to the vinyl version. But for me, it's very different in that I see those opening 4 frenetic songs as something of an intro, maybe a first act, maybe even just an overture. Right. And then what happens when you move into what is essentially side B, we get 4 actual songs with actual guest vocalists in a row, only broken by Toki God Coma, which is, yes, another frenetic fusion piece, but a longer one, a far more organized one with strings and everything, and more of a composition and less of a jam. I'm not counting the 30-second stirring. That's just kind of an interlude. So for me, you've got A is your appetizer, and B is the main course, because you're going Never Catch Me, Dead Man's Tetris, yes, Turkey Dog Coma, but then Corona's the Terminator, and then Siren Song. So this kind of suite of 4 songs.
For me, and perhaps this has influenced how I see the album, by quite a long way, the only bit of the album I haven't really got on with and have fast-forwarded over is Dead Man's Tetris. I sort of heard it once or twice, and then just thought, yeah, kind of just ruins the mood of the album for me. I'm going to make some really old analogies here, but you know that it's because it's a bit comedy-y in its style, cartoony. So amongst all the richness of the rest of it, it just feels a bit, you know, when Ringo used to pop up on Beatles albums and do his, and do his bit. You know, he does was it Octopus's Garden in Abbey Road, isn't it? You know, and you just go, well, that's broken the mood, isn't it? I'll fast forward over that. It just felt to me like that. But yeah, what can you tell me about Dead Man's Tetris? Because I have found it a sort of unnecessary, I could see that, they're having a laugh sort of thing. But it could have been half the length and perhaps not on it at all.
So I've got a few takes on that song. I find it a little bit annoying, but I think it's meant to be. That's the whole point of the da 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 da. You know, it's jarring. Yeah. But I think what's happening here is we're inserting a narrative after the event. Now, is now the time for my grand theory.
Go on.
For the longest time, I, like you are now, I think, was in a state of complete bewildered admiration of this album, thinking it had been crafted as this kind of perfect masterpiece in many ways to follow this narrative. I'm now almost wondering if it was kind of assembled in the order the songs were recorded. It feels like those opening 4, as I say, like they were riffing this crazy jazz stuff, and yes, there's a little bit of that later on, but it's almost like, that's, you know, we're now going to do some songs, and more importantly, we got Kendrick. Snoop's going to come around and do a verse. So we're not going to turn Snoop down, right? Because FlyLo was a big fan. He says Doggy Style was seminal for him when he was growing up. And also more importantly, it's like, well, we're doing this whole dead narrative afterlife thing. Maybe we need to point that out. And yeah, maybe they pointed it out after it being quite an oblique, jammy thing that they're just alluding to, like the death of genre, and you're dead because we're doing it so well, which was the kind of the original idea. And they're now going, oh shoot, you're dead, and then you got the cartoon guns and the. So I don't really mind it. The other thing to note is the first 2 verses. Do you realise who's rapping them?
No idea.
The artist credited Captain Murphy, who is in fact Stephen Ellison himself in his hip hop career.
Okay.
I'm not sure how respected he is as a rapper, and yeah, they've got that great Snoop verse at the end. So yeah, you're saying this song breaks the mood for you. I can see why, and if there's any song that does the same, or I could put in the same bracket, it's actually The Boys Who Died in Their Sleep, which again is when Captain Murphy, i.e. Stephen Ellison, crops up on the vocals, singing in this really squeaky cartoon falsetto, and he's asking for pills and Valium and all the rest of it. There's this demonic laughter. And again, it feels a little bit like tagged on, like we're trying to assert this narrative of death, the afterlife, how we got there. Mm-hmm. So yeah, one more reason why I feel like Never Catch Me is the beginning of a kind of core, the main course as it were. This all reinforces my idea that this is when we're getting a narrative for the first point, right? We're getting Never Catch Me. I guess this is sense of denial. Mm-hmm. With the first time after all the fidgety fusion was, I guess, the process of death. That was the dying. That was the shock, confusion, whatever, like the nervous system kicking off, and then the Never Catching Me is the kind of like, hey, I'm gonna live. And the outro of that song, the last kind of 60, 90 seconds, when you get this kind of like clapping,
yeah,
and then you get the boom, 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 and then you get that really intense booming, which to me sounds like a door knock. That's the death knock.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the right rhythm, but you get what I'm saying. Really insistent, overpowering. That's the death knock. And then Dead Man's Tetris is like putting the pieces together and working out, are we working out how he died? We hear the gunfire, that's the actual moment of death. That's the moment of finally reliving the moment that led to what happened earlier. And then that would tie up with Turkey Dog Coma, this incredibly, incredibly visceral Thundercat workout. I mean, this actually sounds like something off one of the Thundercat's first 2 solo albums. It's just a great piece of bass jerk off homework where he's got two or three more different bass parts riffing over each other, with then some strings from Miguel Atwood Ferguson chucked on top.
Yeah.
Maybe that is finally the nervous system giving up, because then the mood suddenly changes and we get this really ethereal spaciness coming in, and there's slow chip hoppy beats, and those soaring vocals of Nicky Randa coming in, and then Siren Song, I think, really continues that mood. But again, they're both 2.5-minute songs, which for this album is long. Yeah, that's why I see this maybe the first 4 are just the visceral nervous system, and then the next 6 are kind of the inner dialogue of processing the death.
Okay.
And then with Turtles, we go back to strictly instrumentals for 4 songs, which makes up the whole of side C.
Okay. My thoughts. I love Turkey Dog Coma.
Possibly the best song on the album.
Well, yeah, and I'm sorry to do the whole... It reminded me of Zappa. It really did.
Hell, why not?
And why not? And it's, it's almost like, I'm sorry if...
Can I remind you that they got the idea for the record listening to George Duke, who played with Zappa for I don't know, what, 15 years? You know better than me, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, that's Zappa... That's Zappa jams, man.
Yeah. And if you're going to do a sort of, jam workout, clever bit of funk, jazz stuff, and then give it a silly name like Turkey Dog Coma, that's just Zappa all over, isn't it? So it felt very much like that, but I loved it. And because, as you say, then it goes into the ethereal choir, which is fantastic. I really like Stirring, the 30-second bit. That really reminded me of John Martin's Solid Air. I just wanted more of it and thought it was great.
Wait a hot minute.
Go on.
Wait. You do realise it's Jeff Lynne from ELO playing the guitar on that?
I do not. No, I had no idea about that. Well,
so that chimes a little bit with the milieu of like what you're saying, right?
Well, there you go. I've clearly.
I guess they've got him to come in and jam with Thundercat, and they've just used 30 seconds of that, and it's almost like they felt it'd be rude not to.
Hopefully, but maybe there was nothing they really wanted to use, but they thought, well, we better stick something in. Cronus the Terminator and Siren Song I really enjoyed as well, and in fact, I enjoyed. So for me, the second third from was Dogman's Coma through to Turtles, so until Ready or Not, which I feel kind of has links to Dead Man's Tetris. It's the same kind of.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Which is why I saw them both as a kind of interlude-y bits, because they're that similar video-y, gamey feel to them. That second third for me took me a lot longer to get into than the first third, but in the last 2 days, they've been my go-to. That middle section I've really enjoyed, and I don't know why. It's just seeping into my soul somehow and creeping into me.
From the off, I would say if you're not listening to the whole album in one sitting, you're probably missing the point of this. Yeah. But that's actually one reason why I think Turkey Dog Coma stands out, because at 3 minutes and 9 seconds, it's by a country mile the longest instrumental. And actually, apart from Never Catch Me, which is very much a single and does to me jump out as being a bit of a sore thumb, like they needed a single. And I love that song, but I sometimes almost feel like without the Kendrick vocal and without the star power and everything, like had this been a more instrumental album. If you knock Kendrick and Snoop off, of course it'd be a weaker album in many ways. But most of the other vocals, including Thundercat and the female vocalists, Angel Diodarian and Nikki Randy, it fits in with the ethereal quarriness. It doesn't overpower.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like someone taking a guest verse, which is literally what Snoop is doing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I almost feel like if it was just, often with hip hop albums and as reggae albums, you just have the instrumental versions. I almost would like this album either instrumental or just without the guest MCs that bring the star wattage.
Sure.
Also to note, I think this album has to be considered one thing. But if there was one instrumental that does stand out, it's Turkey Dog Coma. It stands on its own, whereas all the others aren't really quite long enough to warrant dipping in and out of potentially. I mean, they're obviously musically rewarding enough, but they're not going to show up on a playlist if they're 30 seconds long. Back to your central premise. So you think the third act begins with Turtles?
No, I think the Turtles. The third act ends, or the break of the second act is Ready or Not. So just like Dead Man's Tetris, you get this kind of suite of songs that's done something, and then with Ready or Not and Dead Man's Tetris, you get this kind of, as I say, video gamey, cartoony type instrumental that breaks them up.
Yeah. No, I definitely feel like Ready or Not is a bit like a sequel to Dead Man's Tetris, and as I said, I think Moment of Hesitation is a bit of a sequel to Tesla. Sure. They've both got very similar kind of riff, similar kind of sonic palette, and a different musical mind might have just had a longer song doing that one idea rather than two kind of big necks. But I also it's a bit like in this way a classical composer, any composer, or would state a theme and then refer to it later, or an operatic motif, or the way a jazz soloist will often quote the melody again midway through them.
No, I didn't find it as sort of jarring as Dead Man's Tetris. In fact, I quite enjoyed it, almost as a kind of break, because it almost feels like, like a movie soundtrack bit where they're sort of just playing out the plot. And they need some music behind it. And there's nothing dramatic happening, but it's really important that the plot is moved on. And it just felt like that, just like, it's kind of doing-y, kind of behind-the-scenes music, and we're just having a bit of a break from all of this totally mad out there riffs and choral work and jazz and offbeats and stuff. It's just, okay, calm down, because we've had another suite of songs that's gone everywhere and done everything in 10 minutes, and that's great. And because it wasn't trying to be funny, don't mind it and sort of enjoy it for what it is.
Well, actually, you say that, but I mean, to me, the mood actually changes once and for all after Turkey Dog Coma. Like I said, we've got all this crazy freneticness and then this kind of like shouty sense of denial, and then it's just kind of calm. Much of the mood after that is calm. I feel that's, the acceptance of death, and then they're preparing for the afterlife, and then they're looking down, and, that all chimes to me. Ready or Not's a little bit more edgy, but, I mean, Turtles is just beautiful with that floating la vocal, right? Which I think may or may not be a Morricone sample. There's a Morricone sample on that song, and there's no vocalist listed, so I think it must be. But yeah, for me, because I'm looking at the vinyl version, you've got those 4 vocal tracks spoken by Tokyo, and then you've got side C, another very short side where you've got 4 instrumentals in a row, and then you flip into Descent for Madness, where again you've got 4 big vocal tracks and are broken by 1 instrumental. So I almost see it as instrumental side, vocal side, instrumental side, vocal side.
Sure.
That's how it's been, presented by Warp Records, and presumably how FlyLo sequenced it himself.
Sure. And I certainly agree that Descent into Madness has a different feel to the two before Eyes Above a Moment of Hesitation. So yeah. And I really liked Eyes Above a Moment of Hesitation. I think in that closing section, they took some risks there. So Descent into Madness and The Boys Who Died in Their Sleep are in an album full of quite interesting out there ideas that they're certainly, I can see why people would be again those two rather than 4, because they're a clashing change to what happened before. But yeah, how did you find those?
Again, Descent into Madness, a bit like Tokyo Dog Coma, sounds to me like something that could be on a Thundercat solo album. That like playing the bass with these really kind of big shimmery reverb laden chords is very him, and then doing a falsetto vocal that mirrors it, or weaves around it. That's a very, very Thundercat thing to do, and I think it's a beautiful song. And then, as I said earlier, I feel like The Boys Who Died in Their Sleep is, as you feel about Tetris, I feel about this. It's like, Ellison's back on the mic himself. He's getting a bit silly. He's got that a bit like the cartoon Guns. Here we've got the cartoon. It's a bit too much inserting this dead narrative. It's a bit like he had to throw a few speech bubbles on. But then we just play out. And I to me, Obligatory Cadence, Your Potential, Stroke the Beyond, and then The Protest, they all kind of, Obligatory Cadence and Your Potential definitely play together, right? It's lo-fi beats, very, very kind of ethereal. It feels like to me, this is the acceptance. We feel like we know it's the end. We know we're there. We're kind of floating in the afterlife. We've got it. The big beats just get even bigger. But then, did you notice how in an album No Pauses, there is a pointed pause before the protest, right?
Yes. Yeah, I didn't mind The Boys Who Died in Their Sleep as much as you do. I found it quite a driving rhythm, and I quite liked that and enjoyed it. Obligatory Cadence, I absolutely loved, but I was also like the title of it. Why call it Obligatory Cadence?
Oh yeah, I love the title.
Yeah, it's kind of like, we know you're going to enjoy this. It's the Obligatory Cadence. We're doing the obligatory, really brilliant cadence tune thing. We're going to suck you in with it, and we know we're doing that. We're very clever.
And actually, interestingly, it has a sample from a piece by someone called C. Starker, which a quick Google suggests is a contemporary classical musician that I haven't heard of, which, as pretensions go, that's another grab bag in FlyLo's arsenal if he's also, sampling that.
And I thought that the rhythm sound of it, you talked about referencing back, it kind of referenced back a bit to FKN Dead, which I was glad of, because I really liked FKN Dead, and there's only 40 seconds of it. So that was great. It kind of tied that up for me, and the potential, the beyond, follows on nicely, and absolutely. And this is why I got to this third, because to me it was like third comedy song, then a third, which to me could have ended. The album could have ended at track 18, the potential, the beyond, and there's a break, there's a pause there. And then they just come in with the protest after a pause, and it's this brief moment of genius. And what are they protesting? Are they protesting being dead? But yeah, it's like a hidden extra track that's really brilliant.
Yeah, only in many ways it shouldn't fit, right? Because it's like these big, rolling, very simple piano harmonies, right? It's in an album packed with so many musical ideas and such restlessness. It's kind of very big and such, disharmony at times. It's this very big, obvious, soaring melodies in a kind of John Legend Imagine kind of way. Said in interviews, it is the voices of the dead kind of saying, yeah, no, actually, but they're not protesting. They're finding peace, actually. Because they're saying we will live forever, because the idea is you will live on forever in the memories of others and in your ideas, and nothing really dies. Probably a little bit Buddhist, but like I said, Tibetan Book of the Dead. And the way that we do have that big break of silence, to me it feels a little bit like you've been on this journey, this album, in the dark. It's like you're watching a movie and you're on this roller coaster and it's gone through lots of emotion, trauma, and the excitement, the denial, the acceptance, and then the lights just kind of come on and the credits roll. This is the credits music going. So maybe the lights have come on, you're out of the trance, and actually you're not dead at all. That's my other takeout. Suddenly it's like, break.
Oh, brilliant.
You're okay.
And I woke up and it was all a dream. Yeah. Brilliant. Love it.
Yeah, maybe. And interesting, you mentioned this hidden track. So I only found out, because I normally just get the needle off, but, I left the record playing and came back in the room. And it's like, on the vinyl, there's kind of 2-3 minutes of dead wax. The video goes round, and then suddenly there is a hidden track. And it's this kind of 3-minute orchestral droney thing that suddenly comes on. And that's, again, like an even more fitting coda, which you won't have got on Spotify, I'm afraid.
Right.
So overall, Dave.
So overall, I have a big conceptual question for you, and you've touched on it. Everybody knows Dave's like prog rock, right? So, and there is a link here, because I am used to albums that either have one song that goes on for the whole side of an LP, or they have one song and they start going into, it's track one, section A, this, section B, this, section C, this. And in the 70s, like prog rock had this whole thing where it had to be, 12-minute, 20-minute long songs. And I am deeply aware, as are prog fans, that some of those songs are written that way. They are planned, written, plotted, and they flow properly from piece to piece and movement to movement across a whole side, and it works brilliantly. Everybody is also aware that the other way prog was made and is made is, a band has about, like Abbey, the second side B of Abbey Road, a band has a lot of half-formed ideas which perhaps don't make a whole song on themselves. But if you stick them together, then suddenly it makes a prog song, and that's bloody awesome, right? And sometimes that really works. And sometimes the sticking them together, the gluing them together bits is so clearly, oh, look, you're just kind of trying to get from that idea to that idea. And so you're throwing some chords and some mix in, and it just about managed to make the join. And that's great too. My first listen, I was left wondering, wow, was this a plotted out piece of music? Or was it, as you could accuse it of, but I don't think it's not necessarily a bad thing, of blimmin' heck, we've got 106 different vignettes of musical ideas, and we are going to try and wallpaper-paste them together in some way and kind of make the narrative after the event. But I don't know, do we know anything about the formation of it in that way?
No, I mean, I have always considered this album to be a masterwork because I assumed there was some grand plan to it. And I think it is only the last few days where I've sat down and listened over and over again and maybe thought a little bit about some of the choices that have been made, that I've started to wonder that if, yes, some of it's clearly improvised, some of it's clearly, with live jazz musicians, which was the idea. Some of it is clearly him making some typical lo-fi beats. Some is just getting some guest vocalists in to spit and seeing what you can do with it. And we can't speak for what happened because we weren't there, but I feel like most makers of, quote unquote electronic music, a lot of it is going to be trial and error. It's going to be cutting and pasting and moving elements around, right? In a way that organic music, as in people jamming in a room, you can do that after the event, or you can do that with different musical ideas, as in you've thought about it. But I feel like the art form does lend itself to that, right? And this is very much someone coming from making music on a laptop. Yeah. I don't believe there was a whole, like it was this album was storyboarded, but I do imagine it was very laboured over. Yeah.
So the first obligatory question. I am on the FlyLo bandwagon. It's not just the only FlyLo Thundercat album I've ever heard. It's the only West Coast beats, jazz, rap, soul album thing. It's a whole new world for me. Where do I go next?
Well, Dave, there's a number of different directions you should go in. I think let's start with FlyLo himself. So all of his albums are pretty wonderful. If you enjoyed the mellower side of this music, the album before this, Until the Quiet Comes, is a little bit of a precursor to this. It's still much more beat focused, but it's again embracing a kind of jazzy mindset. And I would say his other masterpiece is the album before that, Cosmic Grammar,
Right.
which again segues into it's a combination of the kind of beat driven stuff he was doing early on, but with guest vocalists and Thundercat. Even Tom York's even on it. So I would say that would be a place to go next. Thundercat, I cannot get enough of, but by a country mile, his best record is Drunk.
Okay.
But I'm not going to tell you to go and listen to it because I've been intending to pitch it to you all along. And in fact, whilst he is a musical maverick as himself, Thundercat is also quite and equally fidgety in the restless ideas and short tracks and everything. He's not immune to melody and hooks and humor. And I think it would definitely appeal to both the aging hipster dad in you, but also the proggy Zappa fan in you. And then the other record you have to really check out is Kendrick's crossover record, which features all of these guys. To Pimp a Butterfly came out in 2015. And actually, while we're at it, Kamasi. With Kamasi Washington, start with Harmony of the Difference.
Okay.
It's this wonderful EP he did where on one side there's, I think, 5 pieces, each with a different melody. And the other side is he plays all those melodies on top of each other. Okay. So one melody comes in, and then the second comes in from the second song, and that's the harmony of the difference because all of the melodies intertwine together. And it's very big, broad brushstrokes. I don't know how familiar you are with spiritual jazz, but it's normally very big, kind of pentatonic-y, like all embracing, almost churchy melodies. So that's why they can kind of weave together quite seamlessly. But it's big. Right. The sound is, big drums, big soaring vocals, big keys. Everything is, and he's blowing these endless kind of Pharoah Sanders kind of solos.
A question then, because I have been 94% blown away by this, but everything you talked about is like, this is 2014. Yeah. So that seems to be a real hot moment. For me, it's like, wow, this is great. This feels like the launch pad to some really stellar stuff subsequently, maybe, but what's happened in the last 10 years, has the kind of movement faltered?
Well, interesting you should say that. So another interpretation, or rather another way that FlyLo's lent into the You're Dead name is him kind of having a go at all the beat makers who he saw selling out and saying that the scene was dead. Right. Now, I'm not for a second going to say I'm an expert on the LA beat scene. It's not my milieu. Sure. I think there was a particularly hotbed in beat making at that time. Yeah. However, definitely the crossovers between electronic music, hip hop, and jazz. Yes, there was a hot minute, and I do think that Kendrick's endorsement, as well as having Kamasi and Thundercat on the album, he also had George Clinton.
Oh wow!
To Pimp a Butterfly. It was a real banner moment of like bringing retro funk, soul, and jazz into hip hop, and I think that passing moment for jazz crossing over in the mainstream, as I said, also fueled a little bit by La La Land and this kind of contemporary chic, may have disappeared. But if anything, the appetite for improvised music in the mainstream has just exploded since then. Now it's not uncommon to have jazz acts, or certainly improvising funk, jazz, soul based groups, instrumental groups playing at big festivals. I mean, now it's not uncommon, and I think actually the UK scene has really took off following this period. I'd say the UK scene kind of peaked 2017, 2018, but we're still seeing acts like Ezra Collective, who won the Mercury last year, selling out huge venues. Nubia Garcia just released a new album and is going on a huge tour next year. Broken Through, obviously Shabaka Hutchins' work with Comet is Coming and Sons of Kemet, who both now dissolved. But so the UK scene actually kind of really kicked off following this kind of cool, this moment of LA cool, which I think was mainly heralded by this nexus of Kamasi, Thundercat, and the endorsement of Kendrick, which was a little bit in the slipstream of what happened with Robert Glasper winning some Grammys in 2012, 2013 with the Black Radio stuff. So the US had its moment, and then the UK really picked up the torch. But American improvised music has continued to really, really flourish. Another kind of hotbed has really come up in Chicago, home of the International Anthem label. So 2 more artists from that stable that have really blend hip hop and jazz that I'd recommend are Ben Lamar Gay and Jameer Williams. Again, 2 kind of on the face of it MCs, but also producing and bringing in all these elements and strafing into those communities. So yeah, that was a moment, but the shockwaves it sent out are still being felt. And the breakdown of genre, it takes a few trailblazers to lead the way. But now I really feel like more than ever, you don't need to ask a band if they're playing funk or jazz or hip hop, or it's kind of all the same.
Sure.
You know, musicians are now equally fluent in these languages, and that's why I think improvised music is definitely enjoying a continued renaissance. And for me, it's been especially fascinating. I think some of my favorite improvised music has been made in the last decade. Dave, there's lots of homework for you to be getting on with there, and I look forward to reading your report card. I'm intrigued to know though, with music this outrageously virtuosic, flamboyant, and throwing spaghetti at the wall, where would you like to listen to it?
Well, where I'd like to listen to it, it's what you said before about this is creative music on a laptop. But actually, with something this crafted, I really, really want to hear this on a really high-end setup and actually just do the classic listening room thing, because I think this is a produced album where it would merit that. I would love to find 40 minutes of my life where I can set up a high-end system in a small room in my house. And that feels to me is like I want to give it the respect of listening to it where I can really hear it.
Yeah, and I think it's short enough and it is frenetic, fidgety enough. The pieces are so short and sequential that it would sustain your attention. I mean, don't do that with a Kamasi Washington album, for God's sake. You'll be looking at your phone in 5 minutes.
So, anything more you want to say about what the album means to you and what part it has in your life now?
Yeah, honestly, Dave, this album was probably as shocking to my system as it was to yours when I first encountered it. I had just started a new job at a daily newspaper, and the arts editor rang up and said, "Oh, do you want to review a couple of albums this week?" And I'd done a fair share of album reviewing in the past, so I said, "Sure." And the two I was handed was this and a Johnny Marr album, and I thought, Johnny Marr, get on with that. Obviously, turgid. You can guess which album I gave 5 stars and which one I gave 2 to. It was a complete shock to my system. In fact, when I filed the review, the editor rang back and said, you need to mention at least 3 songs in every review. You haven't mentioned any, and also, are you sure about these 5 stars? And I was like, I can assure you, I won't be giving those stars away in a hurry, and it's not that kind of album. There's not really song, and it's true. I don't think I've given anything 5 stars since.
Yeah.
So, Dave, how are you going to top that?
I'm really going to struggle. There's a bit of conceptual continuity here, which I hope you pick up on, and I hope you don't hate this album. But I've threatened Jethro Tull too many times, and so I'm going to pitch to you, and it speaks to what we were saying about how much was this album crafted, how much was it 2-minute ideas thrown together. I'm going to pitch you an album from 44 years before You're Dead was made, which is a Jethro Tull album called Thick as a Brick, which purports to be one long 44-minute track.
Oh, wow. That's a complete antithesis of this. Wonderful.
Good luck with that. And if you have been, thank you very much for listening.